am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 6, Sunday, July 11th, 2021. The lesson is entitled, Hezekiah Rallies Judah's Army. Lesson text comes from 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verses 1 through 8, and 22 through 23. Related scriptures are 2 Kings 18, 17 through 37, 19, 1 through 19, Isaiah chapters 36 through 37, Jeremiah 17, 5 through 8. The place is Jerusalem. The time is 701 BC. Living a life of faithfulness to the Lord is no guarantee that hard times will not come. As a matter of fact, Christians should expect to have trials and tribulations in this life. Acts 14:22, 2 Tim 3:12. What we do have is God's promise that he will never leave us or forsake us. Hebrews 13:5. It is important to remember in times of duress that God is still in control of our lives. Satan wants to cause us to fear our circumstances more than we trust in God. Fear prevents us from accomplishing God's commands. In this week's lesson, we will look at a man who was put in a frightening predicament, but turned to the Lord in faith. There is much for the contemporary Christian to learn from the historical account we are studying in this lesson. God is just as able to care for his children today as he was in ancient times. He has not changed. Today's aim. Facts. To affirm that Christians will face tremendous pressure and adversity in this life. Principle. To establish that God never abandons us to face hardships on our own. Application. To learn that the key to overcoming adversity and fear is to call on the Lord in faith. Illustrating the lesson. Hezekiah's example demonstrates that the prayer of faith is a weapon mightier than the greatest armies of the earth. Practical points. 1. No one who seeks to live a godly life will go unchallenged. 2 Chronicles 32, 1. 2 Chronicles 29, 1 through 31, 21. 2 Timothy 3, 12. 2. We should plan for success with sound strategy and partnerships that do not compromise God's word. 2 Chronicles 32, 2 through 3. 3. God gives wisdom and resources to face both long-term and immediate challenges. Verse 4. 4. Faith does not discourage preparation, but rather inspires it. Verses 5 through 6. 5. As believers, we can face enemies and challenges with confidence, knowing God is with us. Verses 7 through 8. 6. God is glorified when we act wisely and trust him. Verses 22 through 23. Golden text. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. 2 Chronicles 32, 8. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is preparation for a siege, coming from 2 Chronicles 32, 1 through 5. The second is encouragement to stand strong, 2 Chronicles 32, 6 through 8. And the third is victory from the Lord, 2 Chronicles 32, 22 through 23. Introduction. The pen is mightier than the sword has become too many people a trite old cliche. But the power of the right word at the right time has proved compelling over and over again in history. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time of that nation's greatest threat to its existence, the onslaught of Adolf Hitler's Nazi war machine. With many convinced the situation was hopeless, Churchill rallied his nation with a series of public speeches that continue to electrify listeners even today. In ancient Judah, King Hezekiah and his people faced hardships and even more daunting threat. He too rallied his people with words. Hezekiah had one advantage, however. His words appealed to and were backed by the power of God. Preparation for a siege. 2 Chronicles 32:1. After these things and the establishment thereof, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah and encamped against the fenced cities and thought to win them for himself. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come and that he was proposed to fight against Jerusalem, verse 3, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountains which were without the city, and they did help him. Verse 4. So there was gathered much people together, who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water? Verse 5. Also he strengthened himself and built up all the wall that was broken, and raised it up to the towers, and another wall without, and repaired Millo in the city of David, and made darts and shields in abundance. From Abijah we jump ahead in time to another of Judah's kings, Hezekiah, who is characterized in both Kings and Chronicles as one of the godliest and most faithful rulers since David. Only Josiah, who reigned later, is credited with a more unblemished record. Hezekiah had some failings, but they do not appear in this week's text or in prints on its concerns. The nation of Judah had fallen on hard times under the evil rule of Hezekiah's father Ahaz. Hezekiah spent the first 14 years after Ahaz's death conducting a massive reform of Judah's spiritual life. He repaired the temple, destroyed pagan altars and high places, restored the Passover, which had been neglected, and refurbished the temple and its workings. These efforts are described in detail in 2 Chronicles 29 through 31. A rude invasion. 2 Chronicles 32:1. We might think that after faithfully carrying out such an extensive program intended to restore honor to the Lord, Hezekiah might be granted a well-earned time of rest and peace, but it was not to be. The great reforms were hardly completed when Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, invaded Judah. He laid siege to all the smaller fortified cities, intending to break their defenses and take them for himself. An Assyrian invasion should not have been a great surprise to Hezekiah. During his 4th year as king, he had watched on the sidelines as Sennacherib's grandfather, Shalmaneser, laid waste to the northern kingdom of Israel and eventually carted off its population to permanent exile. 2 Kings 17:3-6, 18:9-12. Assyria was the most feared power of the time, or of any time. Their extreme cruelty and other overwhelming power were impossible to ignore. Now, in Hezekiah's 14th year, 1813, they were back. Assessment of options. 2 Chronicles 32:2-3. For Hezekiah, it was bad enough to see the other fortified cities of Judah fall into the Assyrian king's grip. He soon realized, however, that even Jerusalem was not safe, that Sennacherib intended to extend his conquest to the capital as well. The account in 2 Kings 18 adds the detail that Hezekiah initially tried to buy off Sennacherib with a massive tribute, even to the extent of stripping the gold off the doors of the temple, verses 14-16. The reprieve was temporary at best. The Assyrian king soon sent a massive army to the gates of Jerusalem to lay siege to the city, verse 17. His messenger's accusation that Hezekiah was now rebelling against Sennacherib, verse 20, suggests that at some point Hezekiah stopped paying the tribute. The 2 Chronicles account omits the issue of paying tribute, concentrating rather on Hezekiah's defensive preparation. In 33 32:3, we are told that he met with his officials and military advisors and made plans to cut off the waters of the fountains outside the city. This is a reference to springs located just outside the city whose flow could be blocked or redirected as needed. The officials meeting with Hezekiah immediately agreed to lend their assistance. Defensive maneuver, 2 Chronicles 32, 4 through 5. In short order, a large force assembled and succeeded in stopping the flow of the springs as well as a stream that ran through the fields. They knew the importance of what they were doing. Why should the Assyrian king come to attack and find an abundant water supply for his troops? Hezekiah did not stop with securing the water supply. He immediately set about strengthening Jerusalem's physical defenses, beginning with the city wall. Over the years, sections of it had weakened or broken down. Hezekiah repaired these and made them even stronger by building towers on top of them. Then he went one better by building an entire second wall outside the first one. Hezekiah's wall has become known as the board wall, and a portion of it has been excavated and can be viewed in Jerusalem today. Archaeologists tell us that Hezekiah built this wall to enclose the west side of the city, which up to then was unprotected by such a defense. It must have taken a large force of workers indeed to construct even that portion so quickly. Of course, it would have taken Sennacherib considerable time to subdue all the towns of Judah. Hezekiah also reinforced a structure called the Millo, which this was a fortification that dated to Jebusite times, into which David had added, 2 Samuel 5:9. Most archaeologists identify it with a stepped or traced structure on Jerusalem's southeast side. In addition to these measures, the king greatly increased the supply of weapons and shields. The makers of these items must have been working feverishly around the clock. Encouragement to stand strong. Verse 6. And he set captains of war over the people and gathered them together to him in the street of the gate of the city and spake comfortably to them, saying, verse 7, Be strong and courageous. Be not afraid nor dismayed for the king of Assyria, nor for all the multitude that is with him. For there be more with us than with him. Verse 8. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people rested themselves upon the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah, assembling a fighting force. 2 Chronicles 32, 6a. Hezekiah's next step was to appoint military officers, captains of war, over the people. It was important to establish clear lines of authority and organization and not let the people face the enemy as an unruly mob. After choosing his officers, the king asked them to assemble before him in the square at the city gate. It is possible that them refers to all the people, but more likely it was the newly appointed captain. Boosting morale. 2 Chronicles 32, 6b through 8. We could get the wrong idea from the statement that Hezekiah spake comfortably to his men, verse 6. The meaning is he spoke words of encouragement in the true sense of the term. That is, he instilled courage into them. That is one of the most important things a good leader can do. Courage based on true hope is more crucial than all the weapons and defensive arrangements combined. So as the Lord once exhorted Joshua 1:9, Hezekiah urged his men to be strong and courageous. There was no need to fear or be cowed by the Assyrian king or by the vast army he had behind him. Why? The king offered one reason only, but it was decisive. As vast as Sennacherib's army looked, A far greater power was present with the men of Judah. In case his officers failed to grasp his point, Zechariah spelled it out. The Assyrian king had only an arm of flesh at his disposal. 2 Chronicles 32:8. He had a great army, but they were only men. It really did not matter how many of them there were, for Hezekiah and his men had the Lord their God with them. He would not only help them, but also fight their battles for them. It was a bold statement, but it proved absolutely true, and it was exactly what was needed. The men took courage, rested themselves upon his words. Victory from the Lord. Verse 22. Thus the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and from the hand of all other, and guided them on every side. Verse 23. And many brought gifts unto the Lord to Jerusalem, and presents to Hezekiah king of Judah, so that he was magnified in the sight of all nations from thenceforth. The last two verses of our text summarize the victory the Lord gave his people, but it is helpful to briefly survey the particulars of what happened in between. Sennacherib who was still besieging the city of Lachish, must have gotten wind of Hezekiah's moral-boosting speech, for he sent a mocking reply intended to vaporize the newly instilled fortitude. Verse 9. In doing so, he struck at the heart of Hezekiah's message. Sennacherib took direct aim at Hezekiah's assurance that the Lord would fight for Judah. He derided the nation, basing his own confidence on the fact that no nation's gods had stopped him. Why should the people of Judah think their God would do any better? Verses 11 through 14. Of course, this was an empty boast, since Israel's God was the one true God. He labeled Hezekiah's words of encouragement as a desperate attempt at deception that no one should listen to. It would lead them only to worse ruin. Sennacherib repeated his brash claim. No God had ever rescued anyone from him or from his ancestors, and that was not about to change. Verse 15. The Lord there followed a concerted campaign by his officials and messengers to heap scorn on the very name of the Lord and his power. Verses 16 through 19. It was an unremitting propaganda campaign calculated to strike fear and doubt into the populace of Jerusalem. Sennacherib's messengers even made sure they got the message in their own language, speaking to them in Hebrew. What the Assyrian king never realized was that his mocking attack on the Lord's presence and power sealed his own undoing. Granted, his words did have the effect of rattling and bringing great distress to his enemies. However, that only caused Hezekiah to turn more desperately to the one who could help them. Along with prophet Isaiah, Hezekiah prayed and cried to heaven. Verse 20. The account in 2 Kings proves more detail on this. When Hezekiah heard the discouraging reports, he tore his clothes and sent a desperate message to Isaiah, who encouraged him by messenger to remain steadfast. 19:1 through 6. He added his own prayers to those of Hezekiah. The Lord answered those prayers dramatically, having heard Sennacherib insults only too clearly. We are told in 2 Chronicles 32:21 that he sent an angel who destroyed the Assyrian army with all its officers. Sennacherib returned home in disgrace, only to be slain by his sons as he entered his own God's temple. In 2 Kings 19:35 through 37, we learn additionally that the Lord's angel slew 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, and that Sennacherib was killed by his sons Adremelech and Shazer. Such specificity removes any doubt as to historical truth of the biblical accounts. Rescue from the intimate danger. 2 Chronicles 32:22. Thus the Lord saved Hezekiah and its inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. The Assyrian king found out too late that there was one crucial difference between all the pagan gods that had failed to resist him and the God of Judah. Those pagan gods were all man-made, with no more power than a block of wood or stone. When he dared to taunt Judah's God, however, Sennacherib was pitting himself against the Lord of heaven and earth, who possesses all power. The Lord therefore rescued Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem from Sennacherib's threat, just as their king had assured them he would. As it turned out, he fought their battle for them entirely on his own, requiring no assistance from them whatsoever. The defensive preparations and amassing of weapons were not really needed, although it was not at all wrong to undertake such readiness. It demonstrated at least that they were not giving up. The Lord simultaneously rescued them from the hand of all other, that is, from any other threat that might have arisen. That he guided them means he took care of them or gave them rest. So Jerusalem and all Judah had peace on every side. Respect in the eyes of neighboring peoples. 2 Chronicles 32:23. The sudden destruction of 185,000 enemy soldiers does not go unnoticed by surrounding nations. An obvious result of Jerusalem's dramatic deliverance was a boost in the city's prestige, especially for the Lord and for Hezekiah. Many of the neighboring peoples brought gifts to both the Lord and the king. Hezekiah's reputation in the region remained on an elevated status from the time forward. Hezekiah's experience provides a vivid illustration of the principle taught by our Lord. Whosoever exalted himself shall be abased, and he that humbled himself shall be exalted. Luke 14:11. When the king and his city were faced with their greatest threat, he did not rally his people around himself. He rallied them to trust in the only one who could save them. And the Lord proved himself fully able and faithful to do just that. Not many of us will ever face an army bent on destroying everything we hold dear. If Hezekiah could stand up to such a threat with courage and faith in the Lord's protection, can we not trust him to fight for us in the relatively small things we face? Questions. 1. What happened soon after Hezekiah completed his great reform program? 2. What plans did Hezekiah and his advisors make? 3. How did he strengthen Jerusalem's physical defenses? 4. What was the Mil'o? 5. Why did Hezekiah appoint captains of war over his people? 2 Chronicles 32:6. 6. What does it mean that he spake comfortably to them? 7. What great contrast did Hezekiah draw between his army and the Assyrian kings? 8. What made Sennacherib's claim that no nation's gods had resisted him in empty boast? 9. What does it mean that the Lord guided them on every side? Verse 22. 10. How did neighboring peoples respond to Jerusalem's deliverance? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, July 11, 2021. Thank you for listening. God bless.